Right, sorry, I've got a help sheet because I've got a memory like a sieve. So, I retired a few years ago. I was a design and technology teacher and I used to enjoy making things, fiddling with things. I've also got a keen interest in motorcycles, and many years ago, 1980 something, I had a Moto Morini 3.5 Sport, which I had for about 8 years, ran into the ground because I didn't know better then. And when I retired, I needed a project, so I thought I would get another one. Except the prices have gone up. They're rather popular, more money than I can afford. But I kept looking, and eventually what I found was a 252C, so the V-twin 250. As a box of bits, north of Colchester, not too far from me, at a price that I could afford. So I went up and had a word with the chap. He'd got all the bits out. I was able to look at it. Most of the main bits were there. There was a few bits missing, but I thought I can either make those bits or I'll be able to get hold of pattern parts or some parts. The big thing that was missing were any nuts and bolts to hold the thing together. So I think somebody before, or maybe before that, had just been looking for parts over the years and basically putting it together. I believe the frame and engine are together because they have the same engine number, but as for the rest of it, I have no idea whether they came off the original bike or not. So I had a little think, did a deal with a bloke, and a week later I came home with a box of bits. As I said, I wasn't interested in concours. I was happy to make bits or use pattern parts to get it running. And 18 months later, here we are.
These are the photos from the eBay listing, taken, I believe, by a previous owner to the seller that I bought the parts from. As you can see, most of the main parts are there, just missing any fixings. These are the bits in boxes in my garage, some wrapped in sheets, some parts in the green tray, the engine in a cardboard box, the frame and forks on the floor. So having got it home, I set about a dry build. One major task was to go through the parts book and work out the fasteners I would need. Then it was just a case of putting all the parts together to see what I had and what was missing. My original plan was to get the engine running and assemble it well enough to get it registered before spending too much time, money and effort on it, and then just to find out I could not register it. Little did I know. Once I had it assembled, I made a list from the parts book of the bits I needed, then worked out what I needed to get the engine working, and sourced these from Medina and eBay. Before fitting the engine in the frame, I gave it a once-over. I used my endoscope to check the bores, and I checked the valve clearances. As I was on my own, I rigged up a pulley system to install the engine into the frame. Very fiddly and not a little dangerous. Here I am fitting all the control cables so the bike will eventually run. The clutch cable provided from Venhill had a longer inner than was needed, so I've had to turn up a little adapter. I did a lot of research about ignition systems. Almost no OEM systems, either second-hand or remanufactured, were available. Medina's system was nearly £500 including the coils, too much for me. I found a company in Belgium, Horsepower Ignition Systems, that seemed to do a system that looked well made for £270. Like most replacements, it ran off 12 volts. I had to make brackets to fit it temporarily to the bike. I was quite pleased with the mounting plate I made for the control module. It allowed the 12-volt regulator to be on the reverse side. I stripped, cleaned and rebuilt the carbs. Any new parts came from Euro carbs and the cables from Venhill. Later on in the project I invested in an ultrasonic cleaner, just big enough for each carb body and within my price range. So much noise on its first start-up. This turned out to be partly the clutch pull ratchet mechanism which I had to reset. That was a simple problem. Now the tale of woe. An awful lot of kicking, not a little of starter spray. Can you hear the knocking? Engine apart and listen for the noise.
God, that's not good, is it?
bollocks.
Illness and other commitments meant I packed the engine off to Bungee Straw for fixing. He discovered a big end cap put on 180 degrees out. This means the teeth weren't meshing and introduced the big end play that could be heard. Now I had a decision to make. Wait for the engine to be repaired and save money by doing no further work, or plough on and hope the registration process works. I think you know the answer. So rather than stop working on it, it's tally-ho and off we go. The caliper halves were split and cleaned in an ultrasound tank. I got new seals and pistons from Gemini Cart, but the pistons were too long, so they needed machining to length. The nuts and bolts were cleaned and re-zinced. I then reassembled with new pads from EBC. The rear drum was disassembled and thoroughly cleaned. I wet and dried the drum braking surface in the wheel. A new lever was obtained from the club, and I got new shoes from EBC, and then it was just reassembled in the wheel when that was put back in the frame. I had the rear shocks from a previous project. They were disassembled, cleaned, painted, and then reassembled with flesh oil. They're a little longer than stock, but they've been working fine. The front suspension needed some work. The stanchions were pitted, the damper rods corroded, and some wear on the fork legs where they run on the stanchions. I managed to redo with some new stanchions and seals, and I got some replacement fork legs through the club, and ended up with a good pair of legs. The frame was sandblasted. Other cycle parts were paint stripped by hand, then sanded, then etch primed, with top coat and then lacquer on top. Because of the time frame before other bits were ready, I was able to leave them for weeks for the paint to fully harden before the bike was reassembled. It came with yokes and a stem. I had to source the top bearing cup, new ball bearings, and a pattern nut. The yokes were stripped, sanded, and painted. I was very lucky with the tinware. Firstly, they had been stored with a waxy coating to prevent rust. Once I had that coating off and the paint removed, a friend of mine painted all the pieces in Ford Roman bronze. I am yet to decide whether to add the pinstriping. The wheels were taken back to fresh metal, new bearings fitted, and then I sanded them, etch primed, and then sprayed and lacquered in my choice of gold. I was able to reuse the wiring loom that came in the box, with new connectors and mostly pattern replacement parts. I have also converted it to a 12-volt system. For some bits, it was easier to make bits rather than source them. This is the horn bracket, cut, drilled and folded from flat strip mild steel. I have added vibration grommets to the mounting holes, and it still needs zinc plating, just painted at the moment. I turned the tank support bobbins in nylon to start with, although now I'm using alley. I did get some OEM rubbers, but they were perished, so I've printed some in TPU. I wasn't able to find a tacho cable, but the packet for the Speedo cable was labelled as both. Once I got another one, I realised the fitting at the engine end was wrong. However, I was able to machine an adapter to make it fit. Behind the right-hand side panel, I had to fit the Vespa ignition modules and the new 12-volt regulator. The Vespa units are slightly wider than the OEM ones, so I added a bracket to lift them slightly higher so they would fit side by side. The new regulator was narrower than the OEM, so another bracket needed to fit this. That's still got to be zinc plated. Behind the other side panel is access to the battery, some bent wire, an old inner tube, rubber, and I soon had a battery strap fabricated. Have I said I like cheap? My replacement exhaust came without nuts to secure it, so I made some square nuts to fit the exhaust brackets. The original seat cover and foam had seen better days, so new foam was cut to size and glued onto the seat pan. Then lots of fun cutting and sewing up a new seat cover. Came out pretty well for a first try, I think. The rear number plate holder was very rusty. After a failed attempt to weld it, I managed to press some new steel into shape using 3D printed patterns. Very pleased with the result. Many parts are not available either second-hand or new, so I have used alternatives. I went for Continental Contigo tyres. 1. I could get them in the standard sizes. 2. They are tubed. I have already mentioned the horn bracket. I have fitted an Oxford Products fog horn. Looks a little like the original. I got some cheap as chips brackets from eBay for the headlight, but they work. Also some indicators that look a little CEV-ish. There is no riding in modern traffic without mirrors. These also came from eBay. There is a neat ratcheted joint so I can fold them in when in the garage. The bike came with good sprockets. I got a 428 O-ring chain from Moto. It came with a fishtail split link. Okay at this bike's power. It fits well and is not too wide. The bike came with silencers that were a complete state. These came, used but in good condition, from a Club Forum member. The pillion pegs are from Medina. Unfortunately the M10 stud was too short, so these were cut off and a correct length bolt welded on. Painted at the moment, another job for zinc plating. No twist grip in the box of bits, so I got this twin cable Tomaselli unit, which fits and works well. As mentioned earlier, I have gone for a Honda master cylinder. This one meant for a VT500. I believe there is one with a master cylinder and an angle to suit the clip-ons, but c'est la vie. I have since added a Honda adjustable lever. The 4-pole ignition switch came from Moto in Italy via eBay, OEM style and fitted perfectly. I have the original switchgear, but it is in parts and someone has desoldered all the wires. I got this ATV style switch from eBay. It came with a wiring diagram, so not too difficult to splice it into the loom. I got the Velitschi clutch lever as it looked similar to the OEM one. Like the brake lever, I have adapted a Honda lever to fit. Both are now crank levers and comfortable to use. The clutch cable seems very tight against the instrument cluster. I am still working out how to mitigate this. I have printed a cable guide for the speedo cable and brake hose. It bolts into existing holes under the bottom yoke. This is in PLA and painted silver. The side panel and tank badges are also printed in PLA, then painted. The side panel badges are held in place with M3 screws. The tank badges have cut down brass wood screws. I've cut them down so they don't pierce the tank. They just screw through into the original fixing points. I have an original brake light switch, but have used a Japanese type. I printed the bracket in PLA and it clamps against the frame. A little hole drilled in the cable clevis for the spring wire to hook into. The rear indicators originally had chrome steel brackets over rubber vibration dampers. I have printed the covers in PLA, painted in silver, and printed the vibration rubber in TPU. Currently 95A sure, but I have some 70A that's softer that I will use now. The headlight brackets were meant to clamp straight onto the stanchions. I didn't like this, so I have printed some grommets in TPU. I've just reprinted them in 70A sure, a lot softer. To keep the wiring tidier under the tank, I printed some brackets to hold the wiring connectors and flasher units in place. These are in 95A TPU. I did buy some second-hand OEM tamp rubbers, but they were perished. I also know you can buy repro ones, but more fun to print my own. Currently, my 82A Shore is in red. Again, I know you can also get repro gear change rubbers, but if I can, I will. These are in 95A TPU. Again, in 95A TPU, the engine end of the clutch cable. I need to redo this as it is a little bit small. More parts that can be bought, but printed in 70A Shore for the tail light, the rubbers on the outside and inside of the holder. And because I can, I find it fun to design and make, I've printed out my own cable ties to use on the wiring loom, and they are adjustable. I am not sure how it will show up, but I have also printed the rubber battery tray, this in 95A TPU.
So, 18 months later, I've done about 500 miles on it. It's as finished as any project is, which means there's still some fettling and fiddling to do. I'm happy with it though, I've enjoyed riding it. The things I like, although it's not fast, even for a 250, the engine's very torquey and pulls cleanly all the way through the revs. The handling, although old school, some of you will understand what I mean by that, it's very good. It keeps its line, it'll steer, and it's a light bike. The downsides is possibly a little bit small for me. By the time the seat has shrunk and the pegs are up and the bars are down, I start getting a bit of cramp in my hips. The bars give me an ache in my neck, and so I may need to do something about that. So, having run it for 500 miles, it's had one oil change. I still need to double check the carb balance and the tick over. The tick over is probably a bit high, I don't know. The ignition timing needs changing. As I would have said, I've got the Vespa scooter modules in there, not the original ones. So I just need to check that it's not advancing or retarding at the wrong times. I've got to look into that again. I believe you can make your own circuit boards with the components on, so that might be something to investigate at a future point. There's a few brackets that I've either painted or have left as plain mild steel, and what I want to do is plate them, zinc plate them in the future so they don't rust. The fuel tank, I did de-rust it, but I only used 5 litres of Everrust, and it was difficult to get it to coat the entire inside of the tank. I know I need to do that again and probably need to buy another 5 litres so I can fill it up more fully. And some of the thermal polyurethane parts, the TPU parts that I've printed, the rubbery bits, I was using 95A, which needed voids to get the elasticity, and what I found is they just collapsed. And since then I've got my printer able to print softer TPU, 80 or 70, and I'm able to print parts, so I've got some parts to reprint. I'll keep you updated though as I make changes, as I regularly maintain it, and hopefully I'll get some videos of it running. Thanks for watching.